I bought this dresser for $50 at the Habitat for Humanity Restore in Waldo. Great place to find stuff like that. I've gotten other things, cabinets, and that you can refinish. They're very cheap, sometimes very good, sturdy, nice quality stuff. Just needs a little work. And this dresser definitely needed some work. It had beautiful wood grain, and it had beautiful lines. I love the front drawers and the way they kind of curve. But there were a lot of scrapes and stains on the finish. So I decided I'd buy it and whitewash it, which I had done to a couple of sofas in our living room, and they turned out beautiful. With those, I actually used a chemical stripper, but it's extremely caustic and it's very messy. So I decided this time around to just go with sanding it twice with a very coarse grit sandpaper followed by a finer grit sandpaper. So the first step, of course, was to remove the drawers. Some of them were in a little bit bad of shape. One of them was missing a bottom, and one of them has a loose bottom, which I'm going to glue back into place with Elmer's glue, wood glue. That'll take care of that. Then the step after that, of course, is to remove the drawer pulls. I'm going to replace those, and then it's time to start sanding. I have a little square electric sander that I use, and I ended up going over the entire dresser twice. First with a 60 grit sandpaper, which is really coarse, and that took off the majority of the shiny finish that was on the wood. And then I went over it a second time with 120 grit sandpaper, which is a little finer and gives it a smoother finish. Once I was finished sanding, everything was covered with a very fine coat of dust. So I wiped it down first with a dry rag, and then with a damp rag, just to make sure I got everything off. And now it was time to actually do the whitewashing. But first I had to mix the paint. Basically, I mixed 1 part paint to 2 parts of water. And you can see from the measurements that I'm pointing out here on the cup how much I used of each, and I poured them into this red container and mixed them. It's a white, actually a creamy white latex paint that you paint your walls with. The next step, of course, is to actually apply the watered down paint. I used just a regular acrylic paintbrush, and I applied the watered down paint in the direction of the grain. And then I left it on for a few seconds before wiping it off. And I just used clean paper towels because you can dispose of them. The rag needs to be dry, and unless you have a huge abundance of washable rags, this is the easiest way to go. And you don't have to be perfect when you're applying the paint because you're going to wipe it off. It dries pretty quickly, so by the time I finished the first coat, I was able to start over on the first parts that I had painted and start putting on a second coat. The next day it was time to put on 2 coats of polyacrylic. And I used a semi-gloss clear coat. I think it's a Minwax. You can get it at Home Depot. And that'll put a nice protective surface over the whitewash. And it also just makes it feel a little more professional and polished. Once I was finished with that, I put new drawer pulls on it. 2 of them I found at Urban Mining, and they're antiques, so they were a little bit pricey. In fact, they have dates on them dating back to, I believe it was 1869, so they're pretty old, and I couldn't afford to buy all 10 handles, so I cheated and bought some Martha Stewart ones at Home Depot, which I spray painted with a dark brown. I'm not sure how much I like it. We'll see. It's possible I'll change them all out if I find a better deal somewhere of more authentic looking handles, but for now this is what we got. Then it was time to put the drawers back into the chest, and it was finished. Here it is.